So this morning I wanted to do something a little bit different. We are starting this summer a series on the Ten Commandments. Now, if you remember a while back, I said we had mentioned it just kind of briefly on a previous Sunday in another message, and I said we're going to come back to those at some point, and so this is my way of saying we're back to that, and so we're going to kind of take on what do the Ten Commandments mean for us, especially now in the world that we live in today. Because I know over the last 20 years, the last 30 years, there has been a lot that has been made about the Ten Commandments and their role in society and all the different things we've been trying to do with them. And not all of it really has been all that useful, not really been all that helpful. But they are, and they will always remain, an important part of who we are as a people of faith. But we have to understand them, and even more, we have to understand how to apply them. So to get at that, I thought this morning we'd start with a little quiz, just a few questions on there. But the first one's kind of a big one, and that is, I've got the list up here in front of me. As you think of them, you don't have to get them in the right order, but you just want to call out what the Ten Commandments are. What's that? Thou shalt not kill. Okay, we got one. Don't have to be in order. Honor their mother and father. What's that one? No other God before me. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Do not covet. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness. I think we've. I don't think we said don't murder. Did someone say that one? Yeah, don't kill. Okay, I'm like, wait, yeah, we did. This first one. No, I think actually that wasn't too bad. So second question is, does anyone feel brave enough to put them in order? I didn't. As soon as I wrote that out, I'm like, I'm not going to get any takers on that one. I wouldn't want to do that one because I would mess it all up. We'll actually see in a minute why that is, why it's so hard to put them into order. But one last question. Which book of the Bible do the Ten Commandments appear in? Deuteronomy? Is that the only one? Or what's that? I heard in Genesis? I heard in Exodus? Anyone else want to? We've got 3 of them in there. I won't do a, what's that? What's that?
All of them or parts of them?
All of them. Comment from the peanut gallery there in the back who's trying to trip me up. But I mean, she raises a really good question because if you said Deuteronomy, you'd be right. If you said Exodus, you'd be right. If you said both of them, you'd be righter because they appear in both of them, in Exodus chapter 20 and then also in Deuteronomy chapter 5. This is kind of the point where I stop and say, does any of this start to begin to feel like maybe it's kind of complicated? Because we're going to make this more complicated before we start to pull this back. Because one of the other things that we don't have in either Deuteronomy or Exodus is that we don't have like a nice numbered list of commandments in there. Apparently they didn't live in the information age where you have the 10 commandments of the 12 ways to do this, and they number everything out nicely on a website. No, all we have in either Deuteronomy or Exodus is just a block of text like this that they're all in. There's no numbers involved, there's no ranking in there, and so when we end up with trying to put the commandments in order, we end up with this. Now, if you don't need to necessarily be able to read this, but look over at the colored section there on your left. Each column on that colored section represents a different way of numbering the Ten Commandments. There's about 6 or 7 of them over there. And then it gets even better because each number has a color kind of in its line. And so you can see where there's some of them that, there's multiple ones that are in one commandment. Some, they break them out all very differently. And so they're each very different ways of numbering our commandments that we have. And so one of the things is that if we're going to be really serious about the Ten Commandments, we've got to stop and realize that there's a lot more going on here than just putting a picture of 2 stone tablets with words written on them up someplace. because we aren't going to get very far, because we're already starting to get kind of confused in terms of kind of what is on there. Now, I have to say, my favorite version of the Ten Commandments that I've seen displayed in other places, it's a picture of 2 stone tablets, and then all that's written on these tablets is I, V, VI, VII, IX. I'm like, really? That doesn't do me any good. You just put 2 stone tablets up there and 10 Roman numerals on there. So we've got to begin to kind of undo a lot of the stuff we've got in there so we can see what is really going on. Because too often our attempts to try and display the 10 Commandments in so many different places has actually done more harm than good, and in some ways has almost violated the 3rd commandment to not have any false idols. We've gotten so far into some of this. So we're going to take a step back from this. We're going to start at the beginning. This passage in Deuteronomy that we're in is often called the prologue. And what that does is it sets the stage for the commandments and for what we're going to see in the rest of Deuteronomy as we go through this. And one of the most important parts of this comes in verses 2 and 3, where God is telling the people, is kind of setting this out, or where Moses is explaining what we're dealing with here. So here's verses 2 and 3 again. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Mount Horeb. The Lord didn't make this covenant with our ancestors, but with us, all of us who are here and alive right now. Moses is clear on this point, that this covenant was made with the folks that he led out of Egypt, who were alive and who were in that place. That the commandments were given to the group of believers. The people who were trying to follow God, who are trying to understand how to live in that way. That's who these commandments were given to. Were given to those people who were believing. Or to put it in another way, one of the books I've been reading as a part of this, they say this. They say, thus the commandments name a way of life made possible only by our initiation or baptism into a community where there are regular opportunities for confession, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Meaning that when we try and put them in any place other than being directed at us as a community of believers, then we're messing it up. Because they aren't going to make a whole lot of sense outside of a community of faith. Because what we see in this is what God is doing, what God has been trying to do with his people for all of this. Bring them together to form a community, give them opportunities for confession, for forgiveness and reconciliation, because that's how you build a community. That's how you build a solid, strong community. Because if we try and do that in someplace else, try and take them out and try and display them in all sorts of other places, then we have a tendency to stop reading them because we get really focused on making sure they're up in all the right places. And then we miss the point of them. Moses was reminding them that God is their God. And that as we are the inheritors of this, even this many years later, God is our God. And that God has done a very real thing for them and for us. And he gets at this in verse 6 where God says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. God didn't bring them out of Egypt just so that he could enslave them in his own way, different than what they had in Egypt, but to enslave them still again. But God brought them out of Egypt to free them, so that they could be freed not just from their slavery, but also from their own sin that would cause them to fail. And this is what we see God do time and time and again until we get to the Gospels, and we see the most perfect example of this. We see when God sends Jesus into the world to free us from our slavery to sin so that we can find real freedom. And that real freedom is not the freedom to do whatever we want, but it is freedom to grow and to be inside of a community and become the people that God wants us to be. So we can put all this together. The key to this is that we are still called to follow the Ten Commandments. But we have to spend time figuring out what that means. Go back to verse 1 out of our reading. Moses called out to all Israel, saying to them, Israel, listen to the regulations and the case laws that I'm recounting in your hearing right now. Learn them and carefully do them. And the part that really stuck out for me this time and that hasn't in the past was where he says, listen to the regulations and the case laws. This comes out of the Common English translation of the Bible, and I love the way it phrases that because God gives us the commandment, says, here they are. The rest of Deuteronomy is all the case law that says, here's how you apply that. Here's how you figure out what that means. Here's how you make sense of these commands that you've been given so that you can live from day to day, so that you can make it through all of these things. This is the thing about the Ten Commandments. It's not about making sure everyone knows them, but it's that as people of faith, everyone should be able to see them on display through us. That through how we live our lives, folks should be able to see them. It's no wonder then that if we only just put them up on walls, we'll fail because there's no context. There's no guidance. There's no way of helping to apply what we see there. There's no way of folks knowing how God wants us to really kind of pull this out and do this. We don't know in those cases, we don't know what it means to live them out. And because of that, then they cease to be relevant. But we can live them out still. And the other part about this is that there is not an expectation of perfection in following them. Because when we look at the rest of Deuteronomy, we get all those case laws. It's not just helping folks to understand them. It's also telling them, here's what you do when you fail, because you're going to fail. You're going to mess it up at some point in time. Here's what you do so you come back to that. So we get that same pattern of confession, of forgiveness, and reconciliation that brings the community together and makes it stronger so that when they do sin, when they do make mistakes, when they do mess up, they know how to come back from that so that the community can stay strong. That's one of the things we have lost seemingly over the last however many years it's been. We've forgotten how to confess and to forgive and to be reconciled, to build up our communities. And this is what we're called to do through these commandments. None of it is easy, but it does bring us into a community, and it helps us to live together as that community. And it's why, as we come together, even to this day, we spend as much time we do talking about sin and forgiveness and all of that, because that's what begins to draw us together. And that's why so very often when we come into a time to celebrate communion, we start with the confession and the words of assurance, because that lays all of that out there, but then it says, here's how it is overcome so that we can still be brought together.